History and Culture podcasts are a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to PCN's History and Culture podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. This podcast series features interviews exploring Pennsylvania's rich history from the colonial era to industrialization, the Gettysburg Campaign to sports history, and from art to politics and more.
Today we're joined by Eleanor O. Rangers, president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. What inspired you to draft a proposal for establishing a Greater Philadelphia Aerospace Hall of Fame?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about the Hall of Fame. Our organization, which has been in existence since 2010, initially only focused on collecting oral histories of people who were involved in Cold War-related activities in the greater southeastern PA area. A lot of those interviews centered around the Bucks County area, where there was a former naval base. And over the years, we also expanded our remit to help with some historical preservation locally at that former naval base. In addition to that, right around the time, maybe about 2 years ago, we started to really consider that as we've started to learn about more local history, we were starting to come to the realization that, in addition to the work that we've been focused on really with the Navy's presence in the Bucks County region, there was a lot more that went on, particularly with contractors that were in the area and so forth. And as we started doing a little digging, we realized, wow, there is a lot of aerospace heritage in the area. So it would be great maybe to start providing a little more communication and education about that. And earlier this year, when our group was starting to think about the America 250 celebrations coming up next year, we thought, gosh, we should really do something too. And then one evening, it kind of struck us that, maybe something, to really, to align with the themes of America 250 and Pennsylvania 250 and trying to commemorate what Pennsylvania has accomplished on, multiple fronts, and marrying that with sort of our interests in terms of aerospace, the thought suddenly occurred to us, gee, is there a Hall of Fame in Pennsylvania for aviation? And we started, kind of doing some investigation and realized, shockingly actually, that there is not a Hall of Fame in Pennsylvania. There is a Air National Guard Hall of Fame, but not a general aerospace Hall of Fame. And so that was kind of the impetus of our idea that, maybe there's an opportunity for us to initiate the development of a Hall of Fame to commemorate not only a plethora of individuals that have great notoriety with aerospace accomplishments from the area, but also many companies that also made contributions. And we feel, we're a modest organization. We want to start out modestly. We probably would be really focused on just the greater Philadelphia region at this point. But, if interest in this initiative grew, it could certainly expand someday to the entirety of Pennsylvania, because there certainly are other accomplishments across the state. So I don't want to just ignore those. But I think right now we're just, really focused on our efforts in the greater Philadelphia region, just to kind of not bite off too much in our project.
Now, I know this is just a proposal, it's in the early stages, but do you have any idea of what this will look like once it's finished?
So it is in its very early stages, and we're still kind of discussing the logistics. And, again, as a modest organization, we have to be pretty judicious in how much we put forward. But the preliminary vision would be to have probably some sort of nomination process that would take place in early 2026. Either we would supply a list of potential candidate organizations and individuals for people to choose from. And I'm thinking in terms of the nomination process, this may be a collaboration with some of the local aerospace focused or technology focused museums in the region, or we may send it out to the general public, which can serve as also a general awareness thing as well by sending this out. Now I have a fairly extensive email distribution list for some of the programming we do. So certainly they would be candidates for that. But if we send out a nomination process, I'd like to have it narrowed down to probably three company slash people. And then, the thinking is that towards July, so when we are celebrating America 250, we would have some sort of either reception or, sort of an enshrinement ceremony, very modest means just to commemorate these individuals. And then, where that would be housed, I think, is still being discussed. Um, but one possibility would be actually to have maybe a wall of these honorees that would be at the facility known as the Fuge, which was an event center in Bucks County. That was the site of the former Johnsville Centrifuge, and we can even talk about that a little bit later. But that's kind of what we're thinking. It would be probably there, and then I'd like to also have a website as well. That would basically complement that. And the one other piece that we're kind of thinking of, but again, it just depends on, our finances to be able to put something together and maintain it. The other thing that we were thinking about would be to put together also a aerospace heritage trail that could be virtually. The state of Ohio's done a very nice job with creating these types of digital assets. So we were thinking of maybe trying to emulate something similar that would encourage, children and their families to visit different sites where history took place. So those are kind of the things that we're considering at this point, and hopefully we'll be able to make them happen before mid-year next year.
Well, let's get into some of the pioneers in aerospace. One of them is Harold Frederick Pitcairn. Tell us about him.
So, Pitcairn, interesting guy, entrepreneur. His dad actually was a glass manufacturer. So his father was an entrepreneur in and of himself, and I think that may have been where Pitcairn may have gotten his entrepreneurial spirit. But Pitcairn actually, after a brief stint with I believe it was the Army Air Corps, he did not serve in World War I. Like by the time he was trained and ready to be deployed, the war was over. He was discharged honorably. But then he was interested in aviation ever since he was a kid. He had done an apprenticeship, I think, with the Curtiss Wright Company. And he decided to start up his own venture. He ended up buying a plot of land actually not too far from his home in Bucks County, that now is now the Biddle Air National Guard Space, but back then it was basically a what became known as Pitcairn Airfield. And he started doing, wanted to endeavor to do flying there. He eventually won a large contract with the Postal Service and actually developed the Pitcairn Mail Wing, which was something that got gobbled up by a lot of the fledgling airmail companies in the 1920s as a very safe, reliable aircraft for delivering the mail. So he actually was very instrumental in helping to start to expand airmail routes across the United States. He eventually sold off that company. And then, and interestingly, that company eventually morphed into what became Eastern Airlines, an old legacy aviation company. But then after he sold that company, he pivoted to another interest, and that was in vertical flight. And he actually ended up affiliating with a Spanish gentleman who had developed something called the autogyro. Basically, this is essentially, it's sort of a hybrid between an airplane and a helicopter. Helicopters had not been really invented yet, but it's basically an aircraft that is propeller driven, and it has it looks like a propeller on top, just like a helicopter, but it's not powered. It basically it will end up turning basically by, as the aircraft is moving through the air. And there was interest in developing these types of craft in order to be a safer option for like hovering or flying at low speeds. And that was sort of the impetus that the Spanish designer had conceptually. Pitcairn forged a relationship with him. He wanted to bring the autogyro to the United States, so he created the autogyro. Was it the Autogyro Company of America? And they began to actually develop autogyros here in the States. In fact, I believe it was in the early 1930s that um, he Pitcairn won the Collier Trophy, which is an aviation award given for innovation. That was awarded to him in 1931. He actually flew the first autogyro in the U.S. at Pitcairn Field. So he was working on all of that along with this gentleman from Spain. So that's kind of where all that came about. So he's really an entrepreneur, a real aviation pioneer, and right in our backyard. I mean, he was lived in Bucks County.
Another important person that's included in the proposal is Alice Stoll, mainly for her work in what she developed was Nomex. Could you tell us what is that and what makes Alice Stoll so significant?
Sure. So if we fast forward to after World War II, and a lady who grew up in New York became actually one of the first female biophysicists to graduate from Cornell University in New York. She had specialized in thermal regulation and heat transfer between materials. So that was really her research interest. She ended up getting recruited to come to work in Warminster at what was the old Naval Air Development Center, which was a Navy base and operated in the Warminster area for about 50 years, from the end of World War II to 1996. She was recruited there actually by her old boss who had been at Cornell and came down to work actually at the Navy base. And he invited her down to continue doing thermal research. So that's eventually what she ended up doing when she relocated to the Bucks County area. And she eventually was assigned a project to develop a replacement for nylon that was used in pilots' uniforms. And they wanted to leverage her expertise in thermal heat transfer to try to develop a fabric that had better heat resiliency. And because nylon, of course, in the event of a cockpit fire, would melt onto the skin. I mean, it certainly was a far from ideal type of material. So Alice spent the better part of 10 plus years between the late 1950s and the late 1960s in testing a number of different what we called flame retardant materials, some of which were developed by DuPont, another regional company. And eventually, in collaboration with DuPont, they developed actually a fabric woven from a heat-resistant filament known as HT1, and that became the fabric that they systematically tested at Warminster, and that became eventually what's now known as Nomex. Nomex is a six-letter name for the fabric or for that material that was, I think, copywritten by DuPont. But it was Alice that did all of the testing of that fabric in Warminster and is recognized as the person who essentially operationalized Nomex for the U.S. military. Nomex now is an ubiquitous heat-resistant material that's been used in a variety of applications. Not only was it used as a replacement for the nylon from pilots' uniforms, but it's used in firefighter uniforms, used in race car driver uniforms, used in astronauts. That Nomex is part of their flight suits and their extravehicular activity suits. It even was used as part of thermal insulation for the space shuttle on its exterior. So a variety of applications. And Alice was recognized actually in 2024 for her accomplishments by the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Actually, we submitted the application for her to be recognized. we were kind of surprised that she had never, of all of the accolades and awards that Alice had received throughout her career, it was kind of surprising that Alice had never been recognized by that organization. So we were able to successfully petition having her added to the Hall of Fame, that particular Hall of Fame, in 2024.
Now, there's 2 astronauts included in the proposal that are from Philadelphia. Let's talk about the first one, Guy Bluford. What's significant about his contributions to aerospace?
Sure. So, Guy Bluford, he's from Philadelphia, graduated from Overbrook High School, and he ended up going to Penn State, and then on a ROTC. I think he was at Penn State with ROTC. Then he ended up in the Air Force. Ended up getting his wings with the Air Force. He flew fighter jets and missions in Vietnam, like a lot of the male astronauts in that shuttle era. So he was with the Air Force. Then, after he returned from Vietnam, he ended up at Wright-Patterson in Ohio, and he worked on his master's and then PhD in aeronautical engineering, and was also working there at Wright-Patterson in one of the laboratories. I think he was a section chief. Now it's interesting. He was told by the Air Force, I guess part of being a pilot is they have to keep up a certain number of hours, and they have to complete those hours within a certain time frame when they're in the military. So he was being sort of, nudged about, hey, listen, you got to go back to flying aircraft. So they, I think he was sort of like, oh, I don't know if I want to be redeployed, but, I kind of want to fly F-15s. So he wanted to go back to flying fighter jets, but I think the Air Force was suggesting to make him an instructor, like a flight instructor, which is not what he wanted to do. And lo and behold, he happened to have just stumbled on an ad that was circulating at the time. This is now like the mid 1970s, for the initial group of astronauts that would be shuttle astronauts. So he thought, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. And if I apply to be an astronaut, that would fulfill my flight hours. And how cool would it be if I'm an astronaut doing those flight hours? So what the heck? Let me throw my application in. So he was ultimately selected, probably because of his experience in the military as a pilot, and also because of his engineering expertise. So he was selected for that, what they called the 35 New Guys, the 1978 shuttle class. And he did eventually go on to be the first African American to actually fly in space, flew 4 shuttle missions. So he certainly has that, significant accomplishment to brag about. After his 4th flight and he left NASA, he ended up in a number of, senior positions with a number of aerospace companies before his retirement.
The second astronaut from Philadelphia is Pete Conrad, and he walked on the moon in 1969. What was he doing there?
So Pete Conrad, another guy from Philly. And what's interesting, a lot of people don't know, Pete Conrad actually came from a fairly affluent mainline family, actually, I think from Haverford. But also, many people don't know he had dyslexia. He really struggled in school, but he did persevere. He eventually went to Princeton University for his got an aeronautical engineering degree, his bachelor's, and he was also a ROTC guy, and he ended up going into the Navy after he got out of Princeton. So the first Ivy League astronaut, they like to say. So what's funny about Pete is he apparently was invited to undergo the selection process for the initial Mercury astronauts. But he got really kind of irritated with the medical testing. And there is a lot of sort of famous anecdotes about all the invasive medical testing that was required for the initial Mercury astronauts. And he kind of got just sort of fed up with it. And he ended up saying, forget it, I'm going back to flying jet airplanes. So he was, basically down at the test pilot program at Patuxent River in Maryland. But then eventually Alan Shepard, one of the Mercury 7, persuaded him to reapply for the astronaut corps. And they kind of softened up some of the medical testing by that point. And he ended up being selected for the second group of astronauts known as the New Nine. And they were going to be the critical group of astronauts involved with Project Gemini, the interim program that would set the stage for the Apollo program. So he flew 2 Gemini missions, and then he ultimately became the commander for Apollo 12, which was the second landing on the moon in November 1969. So commander, he was the 3rd man to walk on the moon with Alan Bean, and certainly a tremendous accomplishment. And the second landing on the moon was basically to prove, it was kind of, I always think of it in my mind as proving 2 things. Number one, it wasn't a fluke that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, that we did that on Apollo 11. We were able to do it again. So we certainly had proven that capability over again. And also, one of the other interesting objectives of that mission was something that they called a pinpoint landing. So one of the issues they had when Apollo 11 landed is that they overshot their landing target for a number of reasons I won't go into, but they overshot overshot that. So they had to they basically evaluated whether they could actually land where they said they were going to land, and they did prove that. So so Pete has a lot to be proud of with that Apollo 12 mission.
Well, let's move on to some of the corporations that are included in this proposal. One of them is Fleet Wings. What did they do?
So Fleet Wings is actually one of the original small, I don't want to say small at the time, aeronautical companies that was actually based in Bristol, Pennsylvania. They actually bought up a number of buildings right along the Delaware River in Bristol in 1934. They actually started in New York. Now, a lot of early aviation actually started on Long Island. It's very interesting, all the different people that were all mixed together, a lot of early pioneers, but a group of individuals that were interested in aviation eventually started a company, this Fleet Wings company in Long Island, but eventually moved their location down to Bristol, Pennsylvania. They were actually known for developing amphibious aircraft, basically aircraft that could land on the water. Back in the day, we still didn't have a lot of landing strips developed yet, right? So a perfect landing strip is water. So that was an impetus for developing these amphibious aircraft. So that's what a big thing that Fleet Wings focused on. And they actually also are known for their ability to utilize stainless steel in the manufacturing of their aircraft. And they had some government contracts where they were developing some wing replacements for aircraft and so forth. But that's really what they became known for, is developing these stainless steel amphibious aircraft.
There's also Project Spark mentioned in the proposal. What was this project?
Project Spark. So Project Spark is actually considered one of the first STEM programs in the country. This was a program that was developed as an after-school, science technology program for interested kids at Northeast High School in Philadelphia. I believe that the gentleman that developed it, his name was Robert Montgomery, I believe. And he basically, you're in the midst of the space race, going to the moon, so why not tap into that excitement with these kids? And what they did was they built their own sort of like simulations of spacecraft, mission control, and actually did their own, simulations. And they've continued that program throughout the years. It still is in existence today. I think it's evolved a bit now to be doing things with robotics and that sort of thing. But it is it certainly was recognized early on in the 1960s as one of these early, what we now call STEM, science, technology, engineering, math sorts of programs. So I think it's neat to know that we had that sort of innovation in the education system going on here in the Philadelphia region.
So we talked a lot about what's included in the proposal. Could you tell us what are the goals of creating this Greater Philadelphia Hall of Fame?
So, the not only, as I mentioned previously, that one of the impetuses was, of course, to find a way that our organization could help to make a contribution to awareness about, Pennsylvania and its role in the last 250 years. In this case, focused on aerospace. But we also want to inspire kids. I think aspirationally, we'd love to be able to develop educational programming for kids down the line, and awareness as well. It's surprising that so many people, when you start telling them about, hey, did you know there was this, or did you know that there was that guy and he did this, and people are like, wow, I had no idea, and I've lived here all my life. So, we it's fun when you can get that spark, when people get really captivated by that. So, we feel what better way to do that than to commemorate some of these significant accomplishments and these incredible people, um, and to really inspire.
And then lastly, just in a minute or so, what work does the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society do?
So the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society was established in 2010, and our initial mission was basically to collect oral histories of people who had been involved in Cold War related activities. There really was not a organization really doing this in our area. I grew up in Bucks County. I knew that there was a naval base right up the street from me, and knew stuff was going on there, but really had no idea. So part of this was my own sort of, indulging my inner nerd to understand sort of what was going on and what people were doing. But it's really a way to supplement the historical record with this history that, is rapidly being lost, with people passing on. So we started. That was really the initial endeavor in 2010, and after we had collected maybe about 25 interviews, our group started to realize pretty quickly, there's a lot of people we've interviewed that are pretty good storytellers, and their information is not classified anymore. So it gave us the idea to in addition to our interviews, to start actually doing some educational outreach. So now we have a program called History in Our Backyard, which is a monthly webinar or live lectures that we have in Warminster on Cold War related topics. We started with just people who had been interviewed by us, but over the years, particularly when we expanded to webinar format, we now can offer space race related topic authors of Cold War or space race related books that can come and speak as well. So it's really expanded over the years. And then, of course, as we've been talking about here, we've also gotten involved with a little bit of a broader reach in terms of historical preservation. For example, we also are what I would say the de facto historians for the Johnsville Centrifuge in Warminster that was on the former Naval Air Development Center base. And we also assist with preservation of history related to the Naval Air Development Center, and now the Aerospace Heritage of Philadelphia. So that's essentially what we do.
We've been speaking with Eleanor O'Rangers, president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PCN's history and culture content, like the interview you just heard, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Explore other documentary programs, event coverage, and a lot more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.